12 years, that's how long we've waited. And it's been another 8 years since I made that pretty rough flash animation for part 7. A lot has changed since then. Johnny and Gyro, they look way different than originally imagined, and way more animation friendly. So friendly, in fact, I kinda wish these designs existed back when I was working on the second, less crappy Steel Ball Run trailer. It was kinda one of the reasons it took so long to finish. But it got me thinking, after making these two fan trailers, what if I revisited Steel Ball Run from an animation perspective? So let's break it down. Let's talk about the thing everyone brings up first, the horses. Now, people do exaggerate how hard they are to animate, but they're not entirely wrong. Back in uni, I actually had to study how horses move frame by frame. They're notoriously tricky to animate convincingly. All the joints, the shifting weight, the rhythm, just this one shot took me months. Even with the dynamic angles, the horses kind of felt floaty and awkward. But David Production isn't going into this blind. From what we can gather from the Anime Expo interview, Yasuhiro Komura says,
心配している馬の作画をなんとかフィルムに落とし込めるために結構もう加藤さん一緒に何年も前から準備してたので、そのあたりに注目していただければなと思います。
Yasuhiro and Hideki Takahashi were both directors on Part 5's adaptation, with them both being announced as lead directors for the Part 7 anime. And while there wasn't really any mention of it, it's kind of inevitable that we'll see 3D horses in Steel Ball Run. But there's already been quite a few 2D horses throughout the JoJo anime as well, and more than you might think. The thing is, there's a lot of horses in Steel Ball Run. So while 3D pales in comparison to 2D anime, we'll most likely see 3D used for them in some aspect. But with 3D getting better and better, it could be done well. But the question is then, why are horses so hard to animate? Well, it's mainly down to anatomy. Their joints don't act how they look. Front and back legs move independently. And when you animate that wrong, even slightly, it just looks off.
Does an ostrich and a man walk like a horse? The answer is, well, almost.
Now here's the issue. 3D anime has evolved, but mainly for humanoid characters. Animals still seem to be a challenge, but the best comparison for horses is definitely Attack on Titan.
My soldiers push forward! My soldiers scream out! My soldiers rage!
You see, the long shots use these 3D models, while for close-up shots they're using 2D, and thanks to clever direction, you barely notice the switch. So this gives Steel Ball Run a real advantage. Because so much of it is fast-paced combat on horseback, these characters fighting and dodging all while riding means you're probably not going to be noticing if 3D is used. Looking back to what we've seen from the anime, however, it's clear that David Production does like to use 3D alongside their 2D animation. But I have never really connected the two together in any meaningful way. Even with the 3D trying to match the color style of JoJo, they do kind of stick out in motion. And I think David Production knows this, and that's why every time we do see it in use, they cleverly produce a shot with a dynamic angle, or use speed lines and smoke to hide the fact that these are actually in 3D. If you look at this scene from part 2, 50% of the shot has Joseph's 2D scarf obscuring the horses. So this shows that they're clearly competent in the shots that they do use 3D. So if they do use 3D, this, and the fact that the director was on a horse, gives me faith that David Productions, unlike other studios, knows that the technology isn't good enough to blend the two yet. And I mean, 3D isn't all bad. If we look at All-Star Battle, there's actually models for a couple of the horses. And then there's also this mod by Art on the Side that actually use the same character sheets and colors that are used in the second fan trailer. And looking at Slow Dancer and Johnny here, I think just this model would work perfectly from a distance. But why not just stick to 2D? Well, for an example for why 2D just isn't really viable, take the shot I animated in that second fan trailer. This scene's taken from the start of the race, where Dio is racing against Gyro. The problem here is a huge chunk of the manga is people on horseback talking, meaning the animation needs to loop or stretch out the scene while maintaining movement. And that's kind of hard to pull off in 2D alone. Meaning these scenes most likely need to loop the 2D animation in some way for them to get all their dialogue out. So we'd be looking at a lot of shots like this, which based off the horse's movement would look off if they don't have the rider also following that looping movement, leading to them also needing frame by frame animation, rather than being tweened up and down here like Poco Loco. So while mine looks fine for a Sakuga shot, it's not the best estimate for how production will regularly flow, as again all these riding scenes need to be extended to account for all the dialogue, and this ties into why the character designs are now simpler. If you compare them to the manga, they're missing a lot of details. I wasn't really a big fan of them at first, but honestly, I've really grown to like them, and they're much more animation friendly. Take Gyro for example. It's still his core design, just less cluttered, less dots, less studs, less rings, and everything's a little bit more bigger. And this obviously makes him faster to draw, therefore easier to animate, but with these bigger features, he's more recognizable from a distance. And while he still feels like race day Gyro, it's still very different to what he looked like in the early parts of the manga, and a far cry from what we were using in the fan trailer. The design sheets you've been seeing have been illustrated by Grand Gorilla, and these things are just so cool, especially seeing the progression of the designs throughout the years. We definitely worked on this for way too long. If you think it's worth it, leave a comment. If you'd like to see a full video breaking down the production, we've got a lot more characters to show, but for spoiler reasons, we'll be sticking just to Johnny and Gyro for now. If you notice, these designs keep a lot of the manga's detail, and it's kinda cool to see what we could have gotten if they hadn't simplified them. Everything's just a lot more smaller and follows the manga design super closely. But what do you think? Do you prefer these more detailed designs, or do you prefer the more simple anime designs? The thing is, when we first started working on these trailer designs, there wasn't much to go on. At the time, only the first Rohan OVA was out. It had this late Part 7 manga art style, which was a solid start, but the colours were a bit washed out, as well as the movement to this OVA being rather stiff. Then came out 2 new Rohan OVAs, At a Confessional and The Run. They used these more humanistic Part 8 style character designs, but seemed to animate them with the fluidity we saw in Part 5's anime. Clearly, David Production, after working on the Golden Wind anime, influenced these OVAs, them utilizing much thicker lines and being able to push the expressions further. However, then came Part 6. It aimed for a more detailed look, but this came at a price, as keeping those designs consistent took time. Time the anime really didn't have. It's tough to guess exactly how long they spent on each episode, but we can at least compare the character designs between Part 4, 5, and 6. Take Rohan by Teruomi Nishi, simplified for animation, but still full of character. Notice how the shapes are clear, with the details being evenly spaced. An animator could manage that without much trouble. However, if we look at Mista's and Anasui's designs, these little cross-hatch details, for example, are a nightmare to animate. And believe me, because I know at least 2 characters in Steel Ball Run that are covered in them. Consistency is time-consuming, and time is something I really hope the team has. But if we go back to those designs, there's still some subtle details between the two. Mista in Takahiro Kashida's, even in its polished character sheet, has this thick, sketchy approach to the line art, whereas Masanori Shino's looks super on model compared to its manga counterpart. And in that same Anime Expo interview, we actually got confirmation on who's going to be leading the character designs on Part 7, Daisuke Sumagari. And if we look at his past work, he really has an eye for detail, with his drawings incorporating this fluid line work. He even drew this Johnny and Gyro for the event, where we get to see a lot of this fluidity. So what we can see, it's a lot of heavy hitters, and a lot that worked on Part 5 too, which is arguably the best animated part to date, with Daisuke also being credited as chief animation director on that Rohan OVA mentioned. So while budget plays a part, like for all we know, Netflix might have paid well for Part 6, but the issue here is most likely pre-production time, and the actual people that are working on it. Part 5, as we know from the vacation trips that the teams took, definitely had more time in the oven. And again, from those trips, it definitely shows. We got fluid animation, these detailed but manageable designs, plus due to those trips, there was clearly more reference material for the animators. So honestly, it's quite a good thing that these designs are so simple. There's a lot of movement in Steel Ball Run, that kind of being one of the pseudo themes of the part. And while for whatever reason, Part 6 may have been dragged down slightly by Netflix picking up the show, the complexity of the designs was also a factor in that. So yeah, these designs are not all bad, and might even be good for the adaptation in the long run. And it is a long run. Let's talk about the episode count. This 38 to 39 episode format they've used, yeah, I don't think Steel Ball Run can follow that. This part is way longer and way more complex. And some of the stuff that went quick in the manga, they might have to even slow down a bit and explain better. I'm not going to go into too much detail to avoid spoilers, but it could perhaps shine a light on parts like the Boom Boom family arc, the Who Shot arc, and the one I'm most interested to see adapted, how will look in, especially with a horse. We could be looking at 50 to 60 episodes easily. So this might mean these PNGs might be the only things we'll be seeing for a while. But it does give us a good look at the color palettes. Even the logo has this cool new color to it. Color was probably the most subjective part of the second trailer's production. Everyone having a say on what a character or stand should look like, it was hard for us to come up with a base coloring for a design. With this though, we can look to what David Production usually bases their colors off in the anime. Strangely enough, it's the figures. Araki sometimes handpicks the colors for the anime, but a lot of the time it's the super action statues that guide this palette. Their strong silhouettes, as well as the material they're made of, allow them to reflect light realistically, which makes them perfect for reference for shading and coloring in animation. But if you look at the Part 7 figures, yeah, the palettes, they're totally different. Up till now, not every character has a super action statue of them, but the ones we do have look pretty good. Gyro having these steel balls rather than the green ones that can be seen in the Shueisha colored scans. But as we know, the anime has gone with a different approach. For the most part, these super action statues were what we were primarily basing the colors on for the second Steel Ball Run trailer, with us going to other figures made for the series to scope out what outfits look best on characters, most of which can be seen in the second Steel Ball Run trailer. And while not the same, they do carry over a couple of the design's colors. The base colors look very similar, but it seems the accent colors have changed a lot. Johnny now sporting red, and Gyro going with an orange accent, along with the more steel silver look. This might mean we could see these super action statue colors with other outfits. Because if you haven't read the manga yet, there's not just one base design like in past parts, meaning there's still time to see if these other outfits use these possible super action statue colors. But for right now, these are the ones we're getting. And while not seen in the PNG, if we look over to the key visual, Gyro actually keeps his gold teeth. And looking at the rest of the key visual, we get a quick glimpse of the Arizona desert, as this is the second stage of the race. But Steel Ball Run doesn't stay in one place. We will be going everywhere in this part. The sand dunes of the southwest, the fog-drenched towns of the Rockies, and the snowy forests of the Midwest. Now these various locations are slightly worrying for Part 7. While a lot of it is just desert in the early part, something that's easy enough to replicate. Same with the snowy sections of the story. It's more the towns and characters they pass through. We've seen buildings like this done in JoJo before, even in the Rohan OVAs. But with all the different styles, it's kind of hard to say with the backgrounds. We could get good looking while slightly generic, like seen in the first 3 parts. Or since it's a very cinematic part, with a lot of background elements being crucial to the plot, we may see a stylization to the backgrounds similar to Part 4. That's the one thing we didn't really get confirmed at the Anime Expo event. It's hard to predict. Most anime default to samey Japanese backdrops, but with Stardust Crusaders and even Battle Tendency, we already saw a lot of different environments, so we could see a return to the more uniform practical style from Part 3, but as we've seen from most recent parts, as well as the key visual, the anime as a whole is sort of leaning away from that aesthetic. Sure, it looks clean, but it also kind of looks like everything else, and that's the thing about Part 4. Say what you will about the style, but you instantly know you're watching JoJo. So this Steel Ball Run promo background, it doesn't really scream that. Not yet, but again, it's just a promo post. So while we have the directors, the character designers, as well as the series leads, we can't necessarily say for certain what the final direction will be. But at least for the backgrounds, it's leaning towards the latter. I know I said before the budget doesn't really matter, but when it comes to backgrounds, it kinda does. Clearly one is cheaper to produce than the other. But here's the thing, the budget is kind of a tricky thing to measure. From what I could find, the sales of the JoJo Blu-rays have been dipping with each season, but these are based on these Blu-ray sales I've found on Anime News Network. And yet, Golden Wind had a ton of merch. Why? Assumedly to offset the production costs. They expanded revenue streams, that's why you see more merch, more of a social media presence, and more of these paid events. So from Part 5 onwards, they've been sort of trying to cast this wider net on JoJo fans. And as we can see from the JoJo Caravan, this is not slowing down. However, this JoJo Caravan thing might be linked to something else. Again, we don't really have all the stats, especially with Netflix, but maybe due to the dip in revenue, Stone Ocean's anime being broadcast first on Netflix, then brought weekly to networks after, could have created a bigger issue than initially thought. Netflix prefers to release in batches, dropping everything at once or in these sort of chunks. Whereas JoJo used to air week to week, it now releases in batches of 12. And this kind of changes everything. Take when Stone Ocean first released. It premiered on Netflix first, not Japanese TV, and that could have seriously affected how it was made. In traditional anime schedules, episodes are being worked on literal days, sometimes hours before they air. But with Netflix, everything needs to be ready. That means every line of dialogue, not just the Japanese, but the English, the Spanish, the French, the German, the Italian, the Portuguese, all needs to be dubbed before it comes out. Because of this, and the fact that the anime industry is being more open to online outsourcing, this is why you've been seeing the rise of these non-Japanese names in the credits of anime. But with all these different people working on it, production becomes less cohesive. And that's kind of why I mentioned it's not just the budget, it's about time. Time to animate, time to revise, time to polish. So when a streaming platform like Netflix says we need a whole season fully dubbed, fully finished, months in advance, that time sort of disappears. Suddenly, even with money on the table, the schedule's locked, and then what happens? studios start outsourcing globally and rapidly, because that's the only way to get it done. So yeah, budget matters, but in this industry, time is the real currency. So while we've been waiting quite a long time for an actual trailer, just be thankful that they have as much time as they have. All we can hope is they don't rush production, because sometimes the shortest route is the detour. But what scenes are you most excited to see animated in Steel Ball Run? And hey, if you haven't already, go check out the 2 fan trailers I made.
Lord Wamu's face! Look at him! He's in agony!